Welcome to the Lore Weaver podcast, where we explore fantasy, history, world building, and the stories that shape our imaginations. Here we dive deep from A Song of Ice and Fire analysis, to book reviews, to real historical parallels behind your favorite worlds. If you enjoy thoughtful takes, close readings, and long form discussion, you're in the right place. Let's get into today's episode. So, about the person who supposedly betrayed Arianne's Queenmaker plot to Doran Martell, I don't think there was one. Doran didn't need a traitor to stop Arianne. He had all the information he needed. The claim that someone told starts looking less like a fact and more like a weapon if you look deeper into the story and how it impacted Arianne's character. So, why would Doran do this? Because he doesn't trust Arianne, which has made him unwilling to include her in his plans, even though she has been a central part of those plans for the last decade and a half. Doran explains this to her in The Princess in the Tower after revealing that he intended for her to marry Viserys III Targaryen in a plot that would have restored the Targaryen dynasty and achieved justice for Arianne Martell. He couldn't tell Arianne about it because she couldn't keep a secret and blindly trusted too many people. As he says, to you, a secret was only a choice tale to whisper to Garin and Tyene in your bed of a night. Garin gossips as only the orphans can, and Tyene keeps nothing from Obara and the Lady Nym. I could not take the risk. When you look closely at the Dorne chapters, there's no real need for an informant at all. Dorne had multiple perfectly reasonable ways of knowing what Arianne was attempting, starting with the fact that Doran Martell openly suggests that Dorne is already aware of this type of plot, and Tyene confirms on the page that she wants to pursue her father's larger strategy after his death. By the time Arianne disappears with her companions, it would have taken only minimal investigation to uncover what was happening. Myrcella's stand-in was never meant to withstand scrutiny. As Myrcella herself admits, Rosamund only passes for her at a distance and only among strangers. Ares Oakheart's stand-in is even less convincing. Once Doran realized that both Myrcella and Ares were missing with stand-ins, and that Arianne was gone, from there sending Ariohota and a small guard detachment down the Greenblood was the most efficient way to intercept them. Nothing about this requires a betrayal. At this point, it's worth addressing the most common counter-argument, that someone must have betrayed Arianne and that the text simply hasn't told us who yet. Readers often point to Ares Oakhart, Darkstar, or one of Arianne's companions as the likely culprit, but none of these theories actually hold up under scrutiny either. Ares has no incentive to inform on Arianne, and dies in an attempt to salvage the plot. Darkstar's actions actively sabotage the plan rather than expose it, and his attempt on Myrcella's life only deepens the chaos in Dorne rather than preventing it. As for Arianne's friends, Garin, Dre, Silva, and Tyene, there is no clear motive, no demonstrated opportunity, and no textual payoff to justify a delayed reveal. In every case, the theory of betrayal adds complexity without necessity. The plot does not require an informant to function, and Martin gives us no structural reason to believe one exists. What does require explanation is what comes after. Myrcella's maiming was never part of Doran's design. That was Darkstar's doing alone. But the claim that someone told, the insistence that one of Arianne's closest companions must have betrayed her, that serves a very specific purpose. It plants doubt, it fractures trust, and it redirects Arianne's anger away from her father and toward the people she loves most. By the time we reach The Watcher and later Arianne's Winds of Winter chapters, this conditioning has worked. She defends her father, she works with him, she has learned discretion, but she is wondering who betrayed her, because Doran either never intends to tell her or because there was never a betrayal at all. Either way, the manipulation succeeds. Also, Doran absolutely tortures Arianne in The Princess in the Tower. This is not a metaphorical claim. Arianne is not simply confined, she is subjected to prolonged isolation and sensory deprivation. She is denied meaningful communication, left alone in silence, and cut off from anyone who might reassure her or clarify what has happened. The people who enter and leave her chamber do so without speaking to her, reinforcing her uncertainty and fear. Modern studies on solitary confinement consistently show that isolation can be as psychologically damaging as physical torture, often more so. Martin clearly understands this, and he signals his intent explicitly in the text. Arianne reaches a point where she she wishes her father would simply use physical torture, anything to break the silence and uncertainty. During her confinement, she sinks into a depression. She stops eating, she sleeps through most of the day. The narrative strongly suggests neglect to her own body and surroundings. Days came and went, one after the other, so many that Arianne lost count of how long she had been imprisoned. She found herself spending more and more time abed, until she reached the point where she did not rise at all except to use the privy. The meals the servants brought grew cold, untouched. Arianne slept and woke and slept again, and still felt too weary to rise. She prayed to the mother for mercy, and to the warrior for courage, then slept some more. Fresh meals replaced old ones, but she did not eat them either. Once, when she felt especially strong, she carried all of the food to the window and flung it out into the yard so it would not tempt her. The effort exhausted her, so afterwards she crawled back into bed and slept for half a day. Then the day came when a rough hand woke her, shaking her by the shoulder. "Little princess," said a voice she had known from childhood, "up and dress. The prince has called for you." Hota stood over her, her old friend and protector. He was talking to her. Arianne smiled sleepily. It was so good to see that seamed, scarred face and hear his gruff, deep voice and thick Norvashi accent. "What did you do with Sidra?" "The prince sent her to the water gardens," Hota said. "He will tell you. First, you must wash and eat." She must look a wretched creature. Arianne crawled from the bed, weak as a kitten. "Have Mona and Melly prepare a bath," she told him, "and tell Timoth to bring up some food. Nothing heavy, some cold broth and a bit of bread and fruit." "Aye," said Hota. Never had she heard a sweeter sound. This is not the reaction of someone cooling off after a failed political gambit. It is the response of someone being systemically worn down. Most telling of all is what happens when Hota finally comes to release her. For a brief moment, Arianne is afraid of her father. What Martin shows next is not a sudden reconciliation, but the slow collapse of resistance. At the beginning of her confinement, Arianne still believes she has leverage. She expects confrontation. She expects chastisement, and she prepares for it as a contest. When she finds a chest of clothing at the foot of her bed, she deliberately chooses the most revealing garment she owns. She found a cedar chest full of her clothes at the foot of the bed, so she stripped out of the travel-stained garb she had slept in and donned the most revealing garments she could find, wisps of silk that covered everything and hid nothing. Prince Doran might treat her like a child, but she refused to dress like one. She knew such garb would discomfit him when he came to chastise her for making off with Myrcella. She counted on it. If I must crawl and weep, let him be uncomfortable as well. She expected him that day, but when the door finally opened, it proved to only be the servants with her midday meal. "When might I see my father?" she asked. But none of them would answer. This is the Arianne who enters the spear tower, defiant, strategic, still convinced that she can unsettle her father the way she always has. She frames their inevitable meeting as a struggle for dominance. But this confidence does not survive the silence. Days pass, her father does not come. The servants will not answer. The isolation stretches on without explanation. And somewhere in the absence, something shifts. For the first time in her life, Arianne recognizes an emotion she has never associated with Doran Martell. "I am frightened," she realized. "For the first time in my life, I am frightened of my father." When it comes time to see him, she no longer dresses to provoke. She chooses simplicity, humility, submission. Not because she believes herself guilty, but because she understands the stakes. When it came time to dress, she chose a simple gown of ivory linen, with vines and purple grapes embroidered around the sleeves and bodice. She wore no jewels. "I must be chaste and humble and contrite. I must throw myself at his feet and beg forgiveness, or I might never hear another human voice again." That's what she fears. She fears never hearing another human voice again. That's how powerful this confinement was. This is not repentance. It is coercion. Arianne has learned that resistance prolongs the silence, and that obedience, performed convincingly enough, may be the only way out. That fear does not last long once she sees Doran in person, but it doesn't need to. By that point, the damage has already been done. The anger she entered the tower with has been redirected. Her certainty has been replaced with doubt, and most importantly, the idea that someone close to her betrayed her has been allowed to fester unchecked. The isolation was not about punishment, it was about transformation. While Arianne's fear of her father fades once she finally sees him, the paranoia he cultivated in her does not, and that lingering mistrust trust appears to be the point. Long before the Queenmaker plot, Doran has been trying, quietly and indirectly, to teach Arianne caution and suspicion, even as he refused to raise her as his heir. She internalized this lesson herself, recalling that restraint and secrecy were among the few things he ever taught her. Gray had wanted a larger party, but that might have attracted unwelcome attention, and every additional man doubled the risk of betrayal. That much my father taught me, at least. Even when he was younger and stronger, Doran Martell had been a cautious man, given to silences and secrets. But during her imprisonment, that lesson is no longer abstract. It becomes obsessive. When Arianne demands to know how her father discovered her plan, Hota gives her only 2 words and then refuses to elaborate. "How could he know?" she asked the captain. "I was so careful. How could he know?" "Someone told," Hota shrugged. "Someone always tells." Doran's refusal to clarify this point is critical. By withholding the information, he allows that single phrase, "someone told," to burrow into Arianne's thoughts and dominate her isolation. Martin shows us in painstaking detail how that seed grows. "Someone told," Hota had said. The memory still made her angry. Arianne clung to that, feeding the flame within her heart. Anger was better than tears, better than grief, better than guilt. Someone told, someone she had trusted. In her mind, betrayal becomes the explanation for everything that went wrong. Ares Oakhart's death, Myrcella's maiming, the failure of the plot itself. The idea that someone she loved betrayed her is what hurts most. Left alone with nothing but silence and suspicion, Arianne turns that thought over again and again, systemically interrogating every relationship she has. Garin, Dre, and Spotted Silva were her friends of girlhood. She could not believe they would inform on her, but that left only Darkstar. Could it have been Sir Ares? Had the White Knight's guilt won out over his lust? No answer satisfies her. Every possibility leads to contradiction, and crucially, Doran does nothing to stop the spiral. Someone told. When her father came to see her, she would learn which one. Prince Doran did not come the next day, nor the day after. The princess was left alone to pace and weep and nurse her wounds. When Doran finally sends for her, he confirms that this uncertainty is intentional. "Tell me how you knew my plans." "I am the Prince of Dorne. Men seek my favor." "You knew, and you still allowed us to make off with Myrcella? Why?" "That was my mistake. I found it hard to believe that you would conspire against me. I had to learn the truth." And when Arianne presses him, when she demands to know who betrayed her, he refuses outright. "Will you tell me?" "I can think of no reason why I should." "You think I cannot discover the truth on my own?" "You are welcome to try. Until such a time you must mistrust them all. And a little mistrust is a good thing in a princess." This exchange lays bare the mechanism at work. Doran is not merely withholding information, he is deliberately encouraging paranoia. He wants Arianne to doubt everyone around her, to second-guess loyalty, friendship, and intimacy. What's particularly telling is that while Doran insists mistrust is healthy for a ruler, he becomes irritated when Arianne directs that mistrust toward him. The lesson has limits. He is meant to doubt everyone except her father. And it works. By the time we rejoin them later, Arianne is more cautious, more guarded, and far more aligned with Doran than she ever was before. Even as they begin working together, he still does not tell her who, if anyone, betrayed her. By the winds of winter, she is still wondering. That transformation is often framed as growth, but it comes at a cost the narrative never fully erases. Arianne doesn't just gain caution, she loses openness. She loses the ability to trust her peers without suspicion. Where she once believed loyalty could be assumed, she now treats it as provisional. That makes her more effective in her father's world, but it also leaves her more isolated within it. The lesson Doran teaches her works precisely because it replaces emotional certainty with strategic doubt. Arianne is no longer the woman who mocked her father as weak, inert, and incapable of action. The isolation, uncertainty, and cultivated paranoia have reshaped how she sees both Doran and herself. Hota notices the change in her immediately. Princess Arianne returned in time for the stuffed peppers. My little princess, Hota thought. But Arianne was a woman now. Her plot to crown Myrcella had been betrayed and smashed. Her white knight had perished bloodily at Hoda's hand, and she herself had been confined to the Spear Tower, condemned to solitude and silence. All of that had chastened her. There was something else as well, though. Some secret her father had confided in her before releasing her from confinement. Before this, Arianne speaks about her father very negatively in A Feast for Crows, and not just because she believes he is passing her over for Quentyn. In The Soiled Knight and the Queenmaker, she openly agrees with her cousins that Doran's defining flaw is inaction. My father is very good at doing nothing. He calls it thinking. And fear makes even strong men do things they might never do otherwise, and my father was never strong. After her confinement, that assessment disappears. When Obara openly challenges Doran's plans in The Watcher, accusing him of his habitual delay and secrecy, it is Arianne who steps in to defend him. "You do him wrong," said the Princess Arianne. This moment is small, but it's crucial. Arianne is no longer positioning herself in opposition to her father. She is aligning with him, publicly and instinctively, even against her cousins. The paranoia Doran cultivated, directed outward, never toward him, has taken root. Just as importantly, Doran begins trusting Arianne with information and responsibility in a way he never did before. He shares secrets, he includes her in planning, and eventually he sends her on a mission in the Winds of Winter, something he would never have done with the reckless, defiant Arianne of A Feast for Crows. Yet one thing conspicuously remains unresolved. By the time we reach Arianne's The Winds of Winter chapters, she is still wondering who betrayed her. If Doran truly intended to partner with Arianne as his true heir, if the goal had merely been discipline or punishment, there would be no reason to maintain that silence once they are working together. The continued absence of an answer strongly suggests that the uncertainty itself was the lesson. Either Doran is still withholding the truth to continue molding her, or there was never a betrayer to name, and that uncertainty has done exactly what he wanted it to do. She has learned to doubt everyone except him, and in doing so, she has become far closer to the kind of ruler Doran has always been trying to shape. This matters not only for how we read Arianne's past, but for how we anticipate her future. By the time she rides out on her mission in the Winds of Winter, she is operating under the instincts her father cultivated: discretion, suspicion, and emotional restraint. Whether those traits are firmly set enough to really help her in the coming negotiations remains to be seen. But what's clear is that the Arianne who stepped onto the road in Winds is not the same woman who tried to crown Myrcella. That change did not happen naturally. It was engineered. This doesn't make Doran a mustache-twirling villain, but it does mean that the claim "someone betrayed Arianne" functions less as a mystery to be solved and more as a tool of psychological control, one that reshapes Arianne's worldview, her relationships, and her political instincts. Rather than vilifying Doran, I'm unpacking how his treatment of Arianne is influencing her development and whether there was an informant or not. But what do you guys think? Is there a betrayer? If so, who? And is Doran truly manipulating Arianne, or just being a good father and leader? Let me know down in the comments. Thanks for listening to the Lore Weaver podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, please consider following the show so you never miss new analysis, reviews, and deep dives. I would also love to hear your thoughts. Share your theories, reactions, or questions in the comments. Until next time, keep exploring the lore.